As we discussed earlier, a Minneapolis jury held Derek Chauvin accountable for George Floyd's murder last week. And in August, 3 other former police officers are set to stand trial for his death, too. The 3 will face charges of aiding and abetting murder and manslaughter for looking on and doing nothing as Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, killing him. As rare as it is for officers like Chauvin to face consequences, it's rarer still for those who fail to intervene. In fact, it's often more likely that officers who do step in to stop abusive officers are the ones who end up paying the price, including former police officer Cariol Horne, who stepped in during a very similar case of police brutality in Buffalo, New York, 15 years ago. After her intervention, she was reassigned from her post, investigated by the department, ultimately fired just a few months before she would have been eligible for her full pension. And as for the officer she stopped, he kept his post, was promoted to lieutenant, and sued Horne for defamation, winning $65,000 in damages. That is, until he resigned in 2011 while under an internal affairs investigation and was later sentenced to 4 months in prison for using excessive force on 4 black teens. But the murder of George Floyd last May brought new attention to Horne's case. She began to push for a duty to intervene law that requires police to step in. And last fall, the Buffalo City Council approved such a provision known as Cariol's Law. She also filed a lawsuit looking to vacate her firing, reinstate her pension, and earlier this month, the New York State Supreme Court did just that. Cariol Horne joins me now, along with one of her attorneys, Ron Sullivan, who is a Harvard law professor and director of the Criminal Justice Institute at Harvard. Ron, good to see you. Cariol Horne, great to have you here. Thank you much for joining me.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Cariol, do you mind briefly describing exactly what happened that day 15 years ago?
Well, on November 1st, 2006, he was choking Neil Mack, who was handcuffed. We got him outside of the house, and once we got him outside, we were on our way to the patrol vehicles, and he was in front of me, and he just swung Neil Mack around and started choking him. So when I yelled out to him, like, Greg, you're choking him, he didn't stop, so I grabbed his arm from around Neil Mack's neck. And then I was...
And what did he do?
Eventually fired for it.
And by the way, I should have said before, Neil Mack is alive because of your intervention, and it's quite clear based on what I've read, he would not be had you not had the courage to confront your fellow cop.
Yeah, possibly.
Cariol,
I want to take a chance to find out whether...
well, he's glad, and I think we all are. What were the intervening years since like for you?
It was an emotional roller coaster. There was a lot of ups and downs, mostly downs, because I felt that there needed to be a change within the system. So I wrote a law, but I just didn't know how to get it passed.
Mm-hmm.
Until
well, ultimately, you did know how to get it. I'm sorry. Continue. I'm sorry.
I said until 2020 when it was passed here in Buffalo, New York.
I do want to talk about that law and your belief that it should be replicated all over the country, and I think most viewers would agree. Ron, the judge in this decision cited Dr. King, the time is always right to do right, and from afar it seems to me that his decision in part was based on what those 3 cops in Minneapolis did not do by Chauvin's side. Is that a fair reading of where the judge came out?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And there were, apropos of that, there were these T-shirts that I saw in Buffalo in the course during the course of this representation, and the T-shirts read, "George Floyd needed Cariol Horne," and that was just poignant to me. I mean, it's you were right. Neil Mack, in all likelihood, would have been dead, but for Cariol intervening and doing the human thing and stepping in and saving a life.
You know, Cariol, I know I've read a lot about you believing, as I said a minute ago, that Cariol's law should be the law everywhere. And as I'm sure you know, in the George Floyd bill pending before the United States Congress. Intervention would be mandated. We just passed the law in Massachusetts where it's mandated. I know you also think there should be a national registry so that a misbehaving cop can't just move to another jurisdiction and start afresh abusing people. I hope people agree with that. But are you convinced, Cariol Horne, that laws will change the toxic culture that bad cops operate under?
I definitely think that it could. And also within the system, because you have me who stopped police brutality. You have someone like Ron who fights for me to be able to have other officers do the same thing. And then you have a judge who ruled in our favor to basically have the officers do the same thing because it's the right thing to do. So if we're changing it, we're chipping at it little by little, we are eventually changing the old culture.
Do you buy that, Ron? You've been doing this. You were a former head of a public defender agency in D.C. You've been doing this for a long time. Do you buy the notion that verdicts like the one in Minneapolis, verdicts like the one in Cariol's case, and statutory changes can change things, or will bad cops just continue to be bad cops?
I think that they can change things. What Cariol said is important, chipping away. So this is not the final thing. This is not going to make a dramatic change all across the country, but it's one step, just another chip off of that blue wall of silence. So you take the verdict last week plus a decision like this, and people fighting and continuing to fight in other jurisdictions. And I do think that over time, these sorts of decisions can create such a disincentive for bad behavior that police will behave responsibly. May not change their hearts and minds, I don't know, but we hope that it will change their behavior. And if it changes their behavior, we will have more people walking away alive from these sorts of police encounters than we do presently.
You know, Cariol, one of the most impressive parts of the Floyd trial, I think, to almost everybody, was the fact that so many cops, including the top cop in Minneapolis, testified for the prosecution. You rarely see that. Did any of your fellow police officers come to your defense 15 plus years ago when you saved a life and kept Neil Mack from a cop who was ready to kill him?
They couldn't. They didn't have Cariol's law back then. It was basically you just didn't cross that blue wall of silence.
Do you regret doing what you did, considering the price you had to pay for 15 plus years?
Not at all, because Neil Mack still lives, and it was not worth a paycheck in order for him to be alive today.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Cariol, final thought to you, and Ron touched on this when he mentioned that T-shirt, and I'd like one of those, is from the moment I first read about you, and I read a lot about you once I started checking you out, I thought, had you been in Minnesota, George Floyd would likely be alive today. Do you have those thoughts about that case yourself?
Yeah, because it would have only taken one of them officers to stop Derek Chauvin, and none of them did anything. So had only one of them stood up. You had the bystanders who wanted to do something, but what I see is that the only people that can stop police brutality are other officers. And if they stand by and do nothing, then you will have people like George Floyd, Eric Garner.
Cariol Horne, the world would be a lot better place if there were a lot of Cariol Hornes in it. It was an honor to meet you, and I wish you great luck in the future. Ron Sullivan, boy, I'll never say that to you again. Ron, it's a pleasure to have you here, too. Thanks so much for your time.
Always a pleasure, Jeff. Thanks.